Hello, my name is Benny Hester, and my topic is the elderly and disasters. National disasters and the elderly. National disasters are thankfully rare events in the U.S. Nevertheless, recently the Atlantic coast of the U.S. experienced 2 or 3 major hurricanes per year. Each national disaster provides opportunity for health professionals to learn how to target resources in such a way that especially vulnerable populations receive aid in a timely manner. Following a natural disaster, seniors are considered vulnerable populations in much the same way as children. Like children, the frail elderly are often unable to advocate for their own interests because of physical impairment, cognitive limitations, or a combination of the two. Unlike a child, however, it is not certain that an elderly person can easily access the support of a competent adult. Many seniors are perfectly capable of caring for themselves under normal circumstances, but when disaster strikes, some find themselves cut off from their usual support, placing them in a higher risk. Over the years, many elderly people have died during major disasters. It has been documented that many lives lost could have been prevented through mitigation planning and a proper execution of the local EMP, Emergency Management Plan. Fact: in 2005, despite constituting only 6% of the population during Hurricane Katrina, nearly half of those who died from drowning or injuries were 75 years or older. Planning needs for the elderly. There are provisions that need to be considered when focusing on the elderly during a disaster. These are transportation, medicine, and food. For transportation, many elderly adults are unable to evacuate during the disasters. Some are unable to drive or no longer own a car. Others live alone in a rural area without public transportation. Even if older people live in areas with transportation, some are unable to evacuate during a disaster because their local transportation services are interrupted or suspended. An example of this was what happened in Katrina. They were allocated for buses to move the elderly people, but due to lack of communication, no one informed or designated specific bus drivers in order to drive the bus. So that left that resource available but useless because it didn't have a key component. This may have contributed to many of the elderly dying during that event. Medicine. We know that the elderly are inflicted with multiple ailments during their time, and they are on multiple or prescribed medication. So, with that being said, the CDC will maintain a strategic national stockpile from certain medical equipment and medication for distribution in disaster areas. The CDC will send medication for chronic conditions common to the elderly, such as diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure, as well as beds, intravenous supplies, adult diapers, insulin, syringe, and related items. According to the Florida Healthcare Association, it is recommended that the elderly must have 7 to 10 days of medical supplies. When it comes down to food, we must make sure that the elderly are provided the nutrition that they need. Elderly adults face health risks from inadequate nutrition in the aftermath of disasters. The meal ready to eat or the MRE packages that are often provided following a disaster contain too much sodium, fat, and calories for many older adults and have the potential to send some into glucose shock from a too high sugar or raise their blood pressure from too much sodium. When providing pre-packaged emergency food for elderly, responders need to offer shelf-stable meals, not MREs, that are formulated for military troops and first responders who need more calories. We must also not forget to make sure that the elderly consume plenty of water to prevent them from dehydrating. Types of condition that affect the elderly are wheelchair bound, hearing impaired, blind or visually impaired, confined to a bed, paralyzed, requires oxygen or monitoring. When we talk about the wheelchair bound, we need to make sure that if we're transporting them, that we have a vehicle that has accessibility to support or transport that wheelchair. Now, if an individual is in an electric wheelchair, we also need to make sure that there is a manual wheelchair that accompany this individual just in case that electric wheelchair become inoperable. For the hearing impaired, we need to make sure that they have enough batteries to last throughout the disaster or last at least 5 to 7 days. We want to make sure that those who are blind or visually impaired, that someone is escorting them from the beginning and throughout the temporary shelter and until they are reunited with their family. Those who are confined to a bed which are paralyzed, requires oxygen or monitor, we need to make sure that they are accommodated when they reach the temporary facilities. Make sure that there are medical professionals who can care for them and make sure that they are getting all the needs that they require in order to survive during this disaster. Caring for the elderly after the disaster is over. There are 3 elements that we need to focus on: family reconnection, relocation, and mental stability. We know that we need to make sure that we contact the individuals that the elderly tells us who is their next of kin. We want to make sure that they are reconnected with their family members and that they can begin the recovery process. Relocation. We want to make sure that they are not relocated within the disaster zone, and that if they are relocated in a temporary housing, that they have the accommodation that they need, i.e., if they have a wheelchair and need wheelchair access, that the home has just that. And if they have an ailment that prevents them from being able to climb stairs, that they are relocated in a housing that does not have multiple staircases. And when it comes to mental stability, we understand that over a lifetime of accumulated loss, such as death of family members and friends, decline of physical capabilities, loss of vital roles and workplace in the community, and reduced income can make an older adult more vulnerable to trauma during a disaster. It is said that 40% of those evacuees that was part of Katrina suffered from PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. So we want to make sure that we can get those individuals to the needed healthcare professions that can help them. Now, we understand that also the elderly associate with seeing a healthcare professional. They associate that with being a failure when it comes to mental and spiritual aspect of their lives. In conclusion, the reason why some elderly adults are particularly vulnerable during the after disaster includes their impaired physical mobility, diminished sensory awareness, chronic health conditions, and social and economic limitation that prevent adequate preparation and hinders adaptability during disasters. A November 2005 poll survey conducted found that about 13 million persons aged 50 and older in the United States said that they would need help to evacuate in a future disaster, and about half of those people would require help from someone outside their household. Not all older adults are more vulnerable to ill effects of a disaster than younger people are. In many cases, older adults have the life experience, wisdom, and mental resilience to survive, help others, and reassure people who are frightened or depressed by this event. Sometimes you will hear an older adult on the news say, "Well, we lost everything, but at least the family is okay. It could have been worse." With wisdom and guidance in the elderly, we must make sure that we do everything that we can to protect them and evacuate them in the time of disasters. This is conclude my presentation, and these are my resources. I thank you very much. Wish everybody a happy weekend. Go Noles.